What happens when a chart-topping singer sits down for what should be a routine daytime television interview? Only for the conversation to unravel into something nobody in the studio was prepared for. Sometimes the biggest headlines aren't created by a performance, they're created by a single question, and the decision to refuse staying silent. One ordinary appearance suddenly became the story everyone was talking about. Cameras kept rolling, the audience stopped clapping, every smile on the panel slowly disappeared. By the time it was over, one chair sat empty. Millions of viewers were debating what they just watched, and a simple promotional interview had transformed into one of the most talked about moments on television. Stay with me, because every minute of this story raises another question about respect, authenticity, and where the line between a tough interview and a personal attack really belongs. The studio was glowing beneath bright lights as the familiar music faded and applause echoed through the audience. Everything looked exactly as viewers expected. The host smiled toward the cameras. The conversation began with warmth. It felt like another celebrity stop on a busy media tour. Across the table sat Teddy Swims. His powerful voice had earned him millions of fans. His songs were climbing streaming charts around the world, and his latest project was giving him one of the biggest moments of his career. For the production team, this was supposed to be an easy segment. Talk about the album, mention the upcoming tour, share a few personal stories, maybe laugh over a funny backstage memory before heading to commercial. Simple. Or at least that was the plan. Anyone familiar with daytime television also knew something else. Behar had built her reputation by asking questions other hosts often avoid. Some viewers admired her directness. Others believed she occasionally pushed conversations further than necessary. Either way, guests usually arrived knowing there was always the possibility of an uncomfortable moment. Even so, nobody watching expected what would unfold. The interview opened smoothly. Jo smiled and leaned forward. So your music connects with people in a very emotional way, she began. When you're writing and performing, is that something you consciously create, or is it simply who you are? It sounded like a perfectly reasonable opening. Teddy nodded. I don't think authenticity is something you can manufacture, he replied calmly. People can usually tell when someone is pretending. Everything I write comes from experiences I've actually lived. That's really the only way I know how to make music. The audience responded with polite applause. The atmosphere remained relaxed. For a moment, it looked exactly like every celebrity interview viewers had seen hundreds of times before. Jo listened carefully before tilting her head slightly. I've been reading about your journey, she continued, from growing up in Georgia to where you are today. It's quite a story. Teddy smiled politely. Thank you. Then came the question that subtly changed everything. Do you ever wonder, Jo asked, whether audiences expect artists to have dramatic struggles? Sometimes it feels like the music business almost rewards hardship. Do you think those stories ever become exaggerated? There wasn't immediate tension, not yet, but something changed. Teddy's smile faded just enough for observant viewers to notice. His posture stiffened. Instead of answering immediately, he paused. Then he asked quietly, are you talking about me? Jo shook her head with a quick wave of her hand. No, not specifically. I'm talking about the industry as a whole, she continued. People love a classic underdog story, small-town beginnings, financial struggles, years of rejection, then suddenly, success. It's almost become the expected narrative. The room grew noticeably quieter. Teddy kept his composure, but his expression became more serious. I understand what you're saying, he answered carefully. But when you're talking about stories being enhanced, you're talking about people's real lives. Jo shrugged slightly. I'm simply asking whether some stories become part of marketing. The audience shifted in their seats. It wasn't the words themselves. It was the direction. There was now an unmistakable edge entering the conversation. Teddy folded his hands together. I spent years wondering if music was ever going to work, he said. I worked regular jobs, played tiny venues where hardly anybody was listening, drove hundreds of miles for opportunities that sometimes didn't even cover the cost of gas. He wasn't raising his voice. He wasn't arguing. He was simply explaining. But those aren't promotional talking points, he continued. That's just what happened. One of the other hosts attempted to lighten the mood. The music business definitely isn't easy, she said with a laugh. Several people chuckled for a second. It looked like the conversation might naturally move toward discussing the album again. Instead, Joe leaned back into the discussion. I'm just saying there's a formula audiences recognize. That single sentence landed heavier than expected. A formula, Teddy repeated. Joe nodded. Double quotes, the struggle, the breakthrough. The emotional connection. We've heard versions of it many times. This time Teddy leaned forward, not aggressively, deliberately. You know, he said, when you're living through those years, they don't feel like a formula. The studio became almost perfectly silent. You don't wake up wondering how your story will sound in an interview someday. You wake up wondering whether you're making the right decision, whether you're wasting your life chasing something that might never happen. His words weren't dramatic. They were measured. And somehow, that made them even more powerful. Joe crossed her arms. I'm not questioning your talent. I appreciate that, Teddy answered, but it feels like you're questioning whether my experiences deserve to be believed. Several audience members exchanged glances. The energy had changed completely. Even viewers at home could probably sense it. What had started as curiosity was becoming something else. One of the co-hosts quickly redirected the conversation. So tell us about recording the new album. Were there any songs that were especially difficult to finish? It was an obvious attempt to move forward. Teddy looked toward her and smiled. There were a few, he admitted. I think every record has one song that forces you to be more honest than you're comfortable being. Before he could continue, Joe interrupted again. But honesty is exactly what I'm asking about. The sentence hung in the air. Nobody laughed. Nobody applauded. The audience simply waited. Teddy slowly turned back toward her. There wasn't anger in his face. Not yet. Mostly disappointment. You keep coming back to the idea that these stories are somehow constructed, he said. I don't think you realize how that sounds to someone who actually lived them. For the first time, the panel stopped trying to fill the silence. Every camera remained fixed on the table. Every producer backstage was likely wondering whether to let the conversation continue or cut away sooner than planned. Because everyone could now feel the same thing. This interview was no longer about music. It was becoming something much bigger. The room seemed smaller now, not because anything had physically changed, but because the atmosphere had. The easy smiles that had welcomed Teddy onto the set were gone. Even the audience, usually quick to clap or laugh on cue, had settled into complete silence. Joe sat back for a moment before speaking again. I'm asking difficult questions, she said evenly. That's what this show has always done. Teddy nodded once. And that's fair. He paused. But there's a difference between asking difficult questions and suggesting that someone's life is just another marketing campaign. The words landed softly, but they carried weight. One of the producers could be seen just off camera speaking into a headset. Crew members exchanged quick looks. Live television rarely followed a script perfectly, but everyone could tell this interview had wandered far away from its original purpose. Whoopi glanced toward Joe before trying to steer things back. Let's talk about the new record for a minute, she suggested with a warm smile. There's a song on there that's connecting with a lot of people. Teddy looked toward her appreciatively. I'd love to. Before he could continue, Joe leaned in again. But don't you think audiences also enjoy being emotionally manipulated? The sentence froze the room. Teddy blinked. I'm sorry, I'm saying, Joe continued, that today's entertainment industry understands exactly what sells. Heartbreak, hardship, redemption. It's effective television. It's effective music. Teddy stared at her for a few seconds. Not angry, just trying to understand where the conversation had gone. So you're saying my music works because people are buying a story? I'm saying every successful artist understands branding. A long silence followed. Then Teddy slowly shook his head. No, his voice remained calm. I think you're confusing branding with being honest. Joe raised an eyebrow. Am I? Yes. He leaned forward. Because branding is what happens after success. My story happened long before anyone knew my name. The audience erupted into light applause. Not loud, not overwhelming. Just enough to acknowledge the point. Joe noticed it too. She smiled politely before continuing. But surely you understand why people might question these narratives. Teddy let out a quiet breath. I understand healthy skepticism. What I don't understand is assuming someone's struggles become less real because they eventually succeed. That answer earned another round of applause. Joe wasn't convinced. You seem to be taking this personally. I am, he answered without hesitation. Because you're talking about my life. That simple response drew another You've implied they may have been exaggerated, and now you're telling me I'm overreacting because I object to that." He paused again. "If someone questioned your entire career, would you call yourself sensitive for defending it?" Jo opened her mouth. Nothing came out immediately. The audience noticed. For the first time since the interview began, she appeared unsure how to answer. Whoopi gently stepped in again. "I think everybody here understands how personal these conversations can become." "I do too," Teddy replied. "That's why I came here hoping we'd have one." His disappointment was unmistakable. "I wanted to talk about music. I wanted to talk about the people who've supported me. I wanted to thank fans who believed in me before anyone else did." He looked around the table. Instead, he stopped. Then quietly finished, "I've spent most of this interview defending whether my own life actually happened." The audience remained completely silent, not because they were bored, because they were listening. Every word now mattered. Teddy slowly pushed his chair back a few inches. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't loud. But everyone saw it. It was the first physical sign that something bigger might be about to happen. Nobody at the table knew it yet, but the interview was only seconds away from reaching the point where there would be no turning back. Teddy rested both hands on the arms of his chair and looked across the table one last time. The studio was so quiet that even the faint hum of the lights seemed louder than before. He spoke carefully. "I've tried to answer every question respectfully. I've stayed calm. I've explained where I'm coming from." He glanced briefly toward the other hosts. "But I don't feel like we're having a conversation anymore." Jo immediately responded. "We are having a conversation." "No," Teddy said, shaking his head. "A conversation means both people are trying to understand each other." "It feels like you've already decided who I am," the audience murmured softly. Jo leaned forward. "I've interviewed thousands of celebrities." "I'm sure you have," Teddy answered. "And I respect that. But interviewing a lot of people doesn't mean every guest has the same story." She folded her arms. "You'd be surprised." "I don't think I would." His tone remained controlled. "I think that's exactly the problem. You've heard so many stories that you've stopped believing any of them." A wave of quiet applause rolled through the audience. Jo's expression hardened. "So now you're psychoanalyzing me." Teddy gave a tired smile. "No, I'm simply reacting to what you've shown me during the last 10 minutes. Whoopi attempted one final reset. "Maybe we should take a breath and get back to the music." "I'd honestly love that," Teddy replied. "I came here because music changed my life." He looked directly into the audience. "There are people watching right now who are working long shifts. Parents trying to keep food on the table. Young musicians wondering if they should keep going. They don't need another argument. They need hope." For a brief second, it felt as though the interview had found its heart again. Then Jo spoke. "But hope doesn't mean avoiding uncomfortable questions." Teddy nodded. "I've never asked to avoid uncomfortable questions. I've asked for fairness." Jo shrugged. "Sometimes the truth isn't comfortable. And sometimes," Teddy replied, "people mistake cynicism for truth." The room fell silent again. The camera slowly zoomed closer. Even viewers at home could sense that every sentence was bringing them closer to a breaking point. Jo sighed dramatically. "You know what I think?" Teddy looked at her. "I think success has made you defensive." Several members of the audience reacted with audible surprise. Teddy didn't answer immediately. Instead, he slowly stood up. The movement wasn't rushed. It wasn't angry. It was deliberate. Every eye in the studio followed him. Camera operators instinctively adjusted their shots. The producers behind the scenes were suddenly talking over one another through their headsets. Jo looked genuinely surprised. "Are you leaving?" Teddy remained beside his chair. "No, not yet. I just don't think I can keep pretending this interview is about my music." He reached down and unclipped a small microphone pack attached to his jacket. The tiny click echoed through the silent studio. That sound alone seemed louder than anything anyone had said all morning. Whoopi immediately raised a hand. "Teddy, let's not do this." He turned toward her. His expression softened. "I have nothing but respect for you, and honestly, for everyone else sitting here." He nodded toward Sunny, Sarah, and Alyssa. "You've all tried more than once to move this conversation somewhere productive." Then he slowly turned back toward Jo. "But I can't keep sitting here while my life gets reduced to a talking point." Jo shook her head. "So you're walking out because someone challenged you?" Teddy smiled sadly. "No, I'm walking away because I know the difference between being challenged and being disrespected." The audience erupted into applause. Not everyone stood. Not everyone agreed that the reaction was impossible to ignore. Jo raised her voice over the applause. This is live television, so is this, Teddy replied calmly. People deserve to see that it's okay to walk away from a conversation that stops being productive. The applause grew louder. Jo tried once more. You still haven't answered my question. Teddy looked directly at her. I answered every question. You just didn't like the answers. For the first time all morning, Jo didn't respond immediately. The silence stretched. Teddy picked up the small card with the show's logo that had been placed beside his mug. He looked at it for a second before setting it back down carefully. I really did want today to be different. He smiled faintly. I wanted to celebrate the album. I wanted to thank everyone who supported me. I wanted to leave here feeling grateful. Instead, he looked around the set one final time. I'll leave with something else. Double quotes perspective. He turned toward the main camera. If you're watching this at home and you've spent years building something people don't understand, don't waste your energy trying to convince everyone. Some people listen because they want to learn. Others only listen because they're waiting for their turn to speak. Know the difference. The audience applauded once again. Even some members of the crew could be seen nodding quietly from behind the cameras. Jo finally broke the silence. So that's it. Teddy looked back one last time. Yeah, I think that's enough. Without another word, he stepped away from the table and walked toward the edge of the studio. Nobody stopped him. Nobody knew exactly what to say. The only sound was the applause gradually fading as he disappeared beyond the cameras. The empty chair remained in full view. For several long seconds, nobody at the table spoke. Whoopi looked down. Sunny adjusted the papers in front of her without reading them. Sarah stared toward the hallway where Teddy had exited. Alyssa quietly exhaled. Jo finally looked toward the main camera. Well, she paused, searching for words. That certainly didn't go the way anyone expected. No one answered. The silence said more than any response code. Within minutes, clips of the exchange would begin spreading across social media. Some viewers would praise Teddy for standing up for himself. Others would argue that public figures should expect difficult interviews. Comment sections would explode. Reaction videos would appear by the hundreds. News outlets and entertainment blogs would debate every sentence, every expression, and every moment of silence. Whether people agreed with Teddy or sided with Jo, almost everyone agreed on one thing. What began as an ordinary interview had become one of those unforgettable television moments that people would replay, analyze, and argue about long after the cameras stopped rolling. And sometimes, the loudest statement a person can make is simply knowing when it's time to walk away.